Welcome to another episode of The Inquisitive Analyst. I'm your host, Marcus Udikang. And of course, it's the show where we chat about business analysis and project management issues and the challenges and triumphs within those fields. It's inspiring, it's informative, and very much inquisitive. My guest today is a LinkedIn author, speaker, trainer, and a program and project manager, as well as a business analyst. She was once an editor for projecttimes.com and was a professor for the Keller Graduate School of Management. She is also founder, business consultant, and trainer of Facilitated Methods. Please help me welcome to today's show, joining us from California, Greta Blash. Welcome, Greta.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So I thought I'd start off by asking you one very important question. The first one's always the poignant one. What's the path that you took to open your PM consultancy and training business, first of all? And any suggestions or recommendations for those aspiring project managers who want to get to that place as well?
Well, actually, I've been teaching all my life. I started out teaching high school right out of college and then went in and started teaching within companies, and doing some consulting. But I had an opportunity to consult with a very large company in New York City. And after that, through some personal referrals, was able to get a contract for both Coca-Cola and McDonald's. And actually, my husband and I together got that contract. And so we decided to go ahead and start our own business and incorporate. So it kind of just went from there. Now, having a business like this is kind of interesting because there's so many ups and downs. There's good times and there's bad times. And you've got to figure out during those bad times or down times, what are you going to continue to do? And so from anybody trying to start up a business, first of all, you got to figure out how you're going to pay those bills because it's not going to happen all the time. So having some sort of backup from that standpoint kind of helps as you're working through it. But yeah, it's fun, but it is stressful, especially when you're kind of finishing up a consult only to start to realize, where am I going to go next? And the last thing you want to do is start marketing when you're at the end of a project. You want to take some time to celebrate and finish. But if you don't, you're going to have that lag and you're not going to have any business for a while. So it's a little difficult.
Yeah, that's true. As a project manager, you've got experience implementing a CRM and a BI system. What are some great lessons learned that you took away from that project?
Well, actually, I've always been in that data space, whether it was a database analyst or in charge of data management or whatever. And so part of what I was looking at was the frustration that we had all this data, especially metadata, and yet nobody ever knew about it because we couldn't have the tools to actually provide it out. I mean, data warehousing was great technology, everything's there, but it was a black hole. And I think once we finally got into business intelligence and some of the better reporting tools, and then putting those on top of an application like CRM really made it customer facing so that we're supporting customers doing the work they're doing today, which is more just needing information. They're not doing a process. They're doing more the intelligence worker type of aspect. So that combination, and of course, CRM has really expanded to almost become XRM, as they call it a lot of times, where you have the underlying database, which you can then modify to work wherever you need to. And the last one I did literally was for one of the sheriff's departments here in California, where we just kept track of all different aspects of the officers. So it wasn't really the traditional sales, customer relationship management, but it was understanding all the aspects of a particular officer and all the data we could collect and make available then for whatever need there was.
Yeah, I've seen CRMs. I've worked with Salesforce CRM, and it does different industries, nonprofit industries, profit industries, government, non-government. So yeah, it's definitely got its place in many different areas, no doubt. We talked a bit about project management. What's your idea of the prime benefit of being a project manager, and why?
I think actually I need to go back to the benefit of working on a project because to me, I've had the opportunity to become an executive in an organization, the CIO. And you know what? I didn't like it. What I like about project and project management is you actually have an opportunity to make a change to the
Mhm.
organization or the people that you're going to be doing things with, and you can actually see a completion. It isn't like it's just an ongoing process that you're always working on, but rather looking at an opportunity, looking at what change you can make. And I'm really looking a little bit more when I look at project management now into the change management because I'm looking beyond just the process of delivering that result, whether it's a program or a project, and what change it has on the organization and the people, and realizing the importance of that as what we do as a project manager.
Fantastic. Now, you also work heavily in the business analyst world, and they often say that the business analyst is a conduit of change. What's the role of a business analyst on an agile project?
Well, it's kind of interesting when you look at an agile project because most people think of this product owner. And the product owner is the one that provides the requirements. And that's fine, provided that the product owner knows those
Mhm.
requirements. Because sometimes they know how the business works today, but they don't see how it could change. Sometimes they can make decisions and sometimes they can't. So, where I see the business analyst coming into play is working directly with that product owner, kind of behind the scenes when they're trying to prioritize what's going to go into the
Mhm.
next iteration or whatever, and asking those, why are we doing this? And if the answer is because we've always done it before, boy, get out of my way because that's not a legitimate answer. But we talk about user stories, and yet user stories, unless you really explore the persona of those to look at different ways that this story might be done, and then going down and doing some of your use cases and some of the models to show relationships of data and business rules and the order in which processes have to be done, those things are all lost. And we just look at a story and say, oh, here, developer, just go write whatever it is. The business analyst is the one that's really working behind the scene to make sure that developer knows all that detail. The product owner becomes the one that prioritizes what's important. And, if you have different personas, maybe we don't do all of them to start out with. But yeah, I think the business analyst has to be there.
I like that. Very poignant, very poignantly said. Fantastic. What are some problems with identifying and managing risks on a broader project? Obviously, risks are a part and parcel of any project. So, what are some problems with identifying and managing risks on a project, and any recommendations on how to overcome these issues?
Well, I think I'm actually doing a consult right now with an organization. The project managers have been doing it for a number of years, and they're pretty good at what they do, but they're not good at kind of looking ahead and maybe not as much detail as needs to be. So one of the things that I'm suggesting to them is rather than trying to figure out what might happen, because unless you've been there before, it's going to be kind of difficult to do. So instead, why don't you capture what is happening?
Mhm.
Capture your risks, and then at the end, either of a milestone or at the end of the project, convert those issues into actual risks and write them in the standpoint so that they can be brought in to the next project. So rather than saying, oh, this might happen, but if I've never been in that space, it's really hard to come up with those type of situations and put together that risk register. I mean, it's based a lot on experience. So maybe taking the issues and converting them back into risks for future projects makes more sense. And that seems to be working a lot better.
Nice. I like that. And PMOs. Let's talk a bit about PMOs. What are some advantages of a PMO? And how can project managers really work effectively alongside a PMO?
Well, I think we have to go back and look at the different types of PMOs. Okay? We talk about a supportive PMO, and I think those are critical. Those are the ones that provide the training and the guidelines and all to project managers and even some of the team members. The more of the governing type of PMOs, I think, are having a problem today because they're still kind of stuck in a traditional project environment. And when they're looking at kind of the governance and oversight of a project, especially as to whether they're creating the documentation and things that are needed to move from one phase to the other, if we're using an Agile project, we don't have those phases. We don't need that oversight. And so a lot of times if you have that kind of controlling PMO and yet you're trying to do an Agile project, you spend double time. And I've had to do that where I've had to create the documentation for the PMO that the Agile project says don't do because barely sufficient. Nope, here's the format, here's the template, here's what you have to do. So I think if the PMO is able to support, and especially as we transition traditional project managers into providing support on an Agile project, I think that's where they're going to have the value. And actually, PMI is looking at this new hybrid project management mini certification or micro certification. And I've been working on that for a while now because not only am I teaching project managers how to understand Agile techniques, but how to transition them to say, okay, so this is what you did before, this is how you do it in an Agile project. And that's, to me, what a PMO has to be doing.
Nice. I like that. You worked at the Keller Graduate School of Management. You taught project management classes, for several master's project management programs. Looking back, what type of experience was it like teaching, first of all, teaching there? And any recommendations for those seeking a project management teaching career at a university or college?
Well, I think looking back on it, it was fun. And I can remember one class in specifically where I was teaching and I was also consulting at the same time. And it was a risk management class. And so it's kind of fun because every week when I'd come in and do the class, people would say, okay, so what happened to this week? And so I would take my actual experiences and apply them to what I was teaching. And that was one of those areas where the students were saying, we don't want to just learn the theory. That doesn't make any difference. What we want to do is understand how you adapt it. And even when I teach all of my classes, I'm really proud of the fact that I've done so many different types of projects and I can apply that to the theory. I think the theory is important, but I also think we need to figure out how to adapt it. Now, you asked about teaching. I have to admit, I had a chance to teach a couple of times. The pay, unfortunately, is just not good. And especially at a college like that, I was able to buck the system basically. I was teaching a master's program, even though I only had a master's degree. I didn't have the PhD, but because I was certified in what I was teaching, we got a waiver to be able to do that. But, I looked at, if I'm going to teach a master's program, which is what I really like doing, because everybody's really interested and they're really focused on why they're taking the classes. For me to pay the money to get a PhD, and on top of it, if I want a PhD, I want a PhD in project management. There's one program that supposedly gives it, one class only in project management. Everything else is just generic PhD. That's not what I want. I mean, I want to be able to provide that information to students and all. So I think the key becomes, if you're going to teach in the university, once again, you're going to have the credentials to do that. And secondly, you're pretty much going to have a second job because it just isn't paying. And then unless you're also doing that second job, you're so out of sync with what's going on. I mean, even in my teaching, whether it's through the university or any place else, I have to look at the fact that if I'm not actually doing work on projects and teach for maybe a year or two, I'm going to be out of sync with what's going on. That's how fast the industry changes. So as an instructor or teacher, you've got to be also working in the real world to see how things are changing. Otherwise, you won't understand the whole Agile world and how the hybrid, the whole bit. You've got to experience it. You just can't read books about it.
Yeah, I taught at college for a few years, and you're right. The pay is not, it's not that high. It's not that great.
No.
Oh well. Now you've applied your business and academic experience to make project concepts applicable to projects of all sizes and complexities, and you talk about that in your book called The Basics of Good Project Management. Can you provide an example of some of those fundamental skills that are needed to successfully manage projects?
Well, my whole philosophy on project management is it's basically a life skill. And I did a lot of work with the PMIEF for a number of years, the K through 12, and coming up with ideas and ways to teach project management to children, which is crazy because I applied those same techniques. Don't tell my students in graduate class, but I use the same techniques with them. So a lot of times, having them use stickies to come up with what their requirements were, putting them onto a tree to do a WBS, things like that. And actually, I'm lucky now because I actually have been doing this with my grandchildren as they start to do projects for school. They love the fact that I bring over the stickies and we start putting them on the wall and figure out what needs to be done. But I think the key is that just being organized, being able to take your to-do list and figure out what needs to be done and how you break it down into smaller pieces and prioritize those things and then keep on track. What's been done, what has to be done, is there an order in which it needs to be done? And it's kind of interesting because, as I said, both my husband and I have been doing this for years. Our two daughters don't want to be project managers, and yet they both are indirectly because they've sat and listened to us teach. They laughingly say, yeah, we had to sit in the back of the class for a couple of hours till mom and dad finished so we could go to the swimming pool or whatever. But they picked up on a lot of this. And every once in a while, my older daughter will call in because she's in charge of the parent teacher group at our granddaughter's school. And she'll call and say, this is what I'm struggling with. What do you think what do you think I should do? But then she says, but don't use project management terminology. Just speak to me in plain language. So, that's what I kind of did with the book. It was a webinar I did for a graduate program for Cal Southern University. And so I was just talking about basic project management. I had been doing the landscaping of my front yard a couple of weeks before. And so all of a sudden it just kind of popped in my head that, hey, everything that I did, I can relate. And they kidded me afterwards and said, wow, that example was so right on. How long did it take you to come up with that? And I said, in the middle of my talk, all of a sudden. And that's what I do, is that I'm talking about something and all of a sudden some idea pops in from experience. But I try to relate back just the concepts, whether it's the scope or the schedule or the budget or whatever, back to things that we do in real life, because that project management is a life skill. You've got to do things. Maybe you don't look at things as a project, and sometimes they're not, but even going on a vacation is a project.
I was going to say volunteering, if the audience out there, anyone wants to volunteer with PMIEF, they do look for volunteers. And it's certainly a good way to get involved, not just with teaching children project management, but also getting involved with PMI as well.
Yeah.
I was going to say, your book, The Basics of Good Project Management, where can we get a copy? Amazon.com?
Yep, Amazon.com. I also have a couple of other ones out there that I wrote to help people pass both the CAPM and the PMP. So I have a condensed notes version, kind of like a Cliff Notes for those. So that, plus, of course, as you mentioned, the LinkedIn learning classes, which I've really been working more on those in the business analysis space, the foundations of business analysis, which is very popular and very well received. Just completed one a couple of months ago on business analysis for project managers to try to explain to project managers what business analysis is all about. What do you do if you don't have a business analyst on your project? What do you have to do then? Because there's a lot of things that a business analyst helps, whether it's just kind of understanding more about the requirements or the engagement with the stakeholders or working with the testing or transitioning, things like that. So that's a new LinkedIn learning class that's out there now.
Yeah, I find there's that symbiotic, that relationship between the PM and the BA, that it's kind of hard to separate them. They're always working together. So
well, and I think if you're inquisitive, as opposed to trying to just manage, I laughingly say, they're doing a construction out behind my house right now. I would love to go kind of look at kind of how they're doing certain things, like setting the lights at the new intersection where they're putting stop lights, and just figuring out when they're deciding what section to work on as far as equipment and supplies. So, I'm always looking at how things are done and why, but I also, unfortunately, kind of try to understand the rules, especially like on an airplane, trying to understand why they do certain things. And then on the other hand, when they don't follow the rules, it just drives me batty. It's like, wait, you're supposed to do this. You have boarding groups. Now, all of a sudden, people just go board anytime and nobody does anything about it. So, if you don't follow the rules, why do you have them? So that's just, once again, kind of the BA in me.
Yeah. Talking about being inquisitive and also rules, what are some initial steps that organizations need to take to establish an effective change control board? It's all about rules. Why is the CCB so valuable?
Well, I have to go back and say, it depends on what your change control board is, just like what is your PMO. If I have a change control board who is really set to address every change in a project, they're going to be 24/7, and those people are not going to have another job. Part of what we have to look at the beginning of a project is, first of all, decide what is a change as opposed to a clarification. What really impact does it have, and therefore what do we need to do about it? And I've always used steering committees when I have to get decisions, especially about different organizations or cross-functional decisions. And to me, that's more what a change control board is doing, is looking at not the everyday changes, but when you have a change that may impact other people. That's where I see that. Now, what's interesting, though, if we go back, traditional projects where we have these baselines, which, once again, we can have a whole discussion on controlling baselines and requirements and things like that. But in Agile, you don't have that. What you have is you have a product owner and a business analyst, and the team decide what they're going to work on in this next iteration. And during that 2 weeks or 3 weeks, whatever it is, there is no change. There's absolutely no change there. Now, you could stop something, you could clarify something, but you can't put something new in the middle of that short period of time. Everything over behind the scenes can change. So we don't really have a change control board from that standpoint. It's the product owner. It's the team. It's the prioritization of what's going on. So deciding that something needs to be added or doesn't need to be added, can be moved out. That's that grooming or pruning the product tree we talk about. So I think some organizations misconstrue this CCB to be more that board that determines what can go into production. So it's a weekly we'll decide if everything's ready to go into production and everybody's ready for the change. And they'll call that sometimes a change control board. In project management, we tend to look at it that if you change a baseline, then you have to go through change control board. But, once again, your schedule is baselined. But if I need to move a couple of things around because of resources, do I go to a change control board? No. If I impact the main critical path and it's going to cost me so much more money or whatever, or I have a brand new requirement that came in, well, maybe we take an agile approach and say, okay, so if this is that important, why don't I move something else out? The whole scope, once again, kind of going off a little bit more, but the idea of rather than doing that triple constraint triangle where you figure out your scope and then figure out how long it's going to take and how much it's going to cost, we turn it upside down in Agile. This is our scope. This is how much time we have. And whatever is the most important is what we do. And if it's not that important, it gets delayed. So those changes, if it's really that important, it's going to go in there and it's going to move things down in importance. So I think that whole area, not to mention the confusion between change management and change control management. Change control management is often called change management, configuration management. Change management is how the people who are on the receiving end of your result are going to be impacted. And that's a whole different story.
Well, I like how you make that distinguishing difference. And that's really, really important to point out. Fantastic. I want to thank you for coming on the show, Greta. It's a pleasure listening to you speak. It's a pleasure getting all this information from you, all in a confined space and time within a certain scope, so to speak. If the audience wants to get in touch with you, how can they do so?
Well, obviously, I have my website, www.facilitatedmethods.com, and I try to put postings up there and webinars and things that I've done. Obviously, LinkedIn is probably the best place to get a hold of me. And I would encourage you, if you have the access to LinkedIn Learning, to check out those 2 classes. I think they're really good. As a project manager, understanding what the role of a business analyst is real critical. But hopefully I'll have some other books coming and things that I'm working on. But, it's a changing world. And so priorities have to change all the time on those. So
that's true. That's fantastic. Well, thanks for coming on the show. I really appreciate your time, and many, many thanks again for a very, very inquisitive and very informative session.
Great. Thank you for inviting me.
You're welcome. All right. Have a great day.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye.